So one of the things we've talked about a little bit before is that Ubuntu disables the root account by default. And then we'll typically use the sudo in order to be able to accomplish administrative tasks. Now, you can obviously activate the root account. All you've got to do is give it a password, and that activates the account. But if you don't, so the root account is always going to have all access to the system. Now, using sudo instead of root gives you a little more fine control over what you can do on the system. Let me show you what I mean. So, first off, we have a group called sudo, and we can see that if we go to cat/etc/group, and then that gives us all of our groups. And then we can use the little tool that we talked about before, grep root. And this will show me, whoops, I don't want group root, I wanted sudo. So this is going to show me that I have one user in my sudo group, and that's me. Okay, so I've got that sudo group. Then, and by default, anybody who's in that sudo group can use the sudo command. Now, we can control that using data in a file, and the file is going to be in the etc folders, or in the etc folder, and the file name is going to be sudoers. So it's cat/etc/sudo or sudoers. And that's going to give me my configuration. Now, I can edit this directly. In fact, I will edit this directly, but there is a tool that we can use to edit this directly that gives a little bit of more control over it. So if I were to use Nano to edit this file, I could do that. Everything would work great. But if I screwed up the file when I went to save it, that might create a problem for me later on. Well, we have a tool called visudo, and this allows us to edit the file. Now, it opens it up in Nano, but when I go to close it, it will syntax check the file and make sure that I haven't screwed anything up. So, using visudo is better than editing the file by opening it directly using Nano or Pico or whatever. Nano, by the way, it opens up in Nano because Nano is the default text editor on this version of Ubuntu Server. So let's take a look at a couple of lines here. Remember, anything with a hash and the cyan color, that is a comment. Anything without that is an actual configuration line. So here is our user privilege specification. So we've got the root user. Members of the admin group may gain root privileges and allow members of the group sudo to execute any command. Okay. So what I can do, if I want to modify this, there's a couple of things we can do. I can add another user in here or a group. So if I wanted to add a user, I would put in the user name. If I wanted to add a group, I would put in % and then the group name. I actually don't want either of those, but I just want to show you how we could add them. Now, let's talk about these other lines here. Or this rest of this line. All equals all : all in parentheses all. Now, this means that anybody who's in the sudo group gets all power. Let's break these down. So this first all right here, that's the station that they can do this from. So if I want to limit them to only being able to do things from specific stations, I'd put the station information here. This equals all. This means, the second all right here, means they can impersonate any user. Remember in a couple of videos back, we were talking about switching users. Well, I could do that using sudo because as a member of the sudo group, it allowed me to impersonate any user. This allows me to impersonate any group. So if I didn't want somebody to be able to, let's create a new one here for George. And I didn't want George to be able to impersonate everybody, but I wanted him to be able to use any workstation. I could just do all and then not do the rest of this line. Now, this last all identifies the commands that they can use. So what I can do is I can do something like this. /sbin /shutdown. Okay, what this would do is this would say George can access sudo. He'd be a sudo user, and I need to add him to the sudo group as well. But it means George could use sudo then from this workstation. I forgot one equal sign here. Or from any workstation to execute the commands shut down and reboot. I just need to get rid of that right there. Now you'll notice I put in the full path to the command and didn't just type reboot comma shutdown. And the reason behind that is if somebody wanted to be creative, they could potentially create a script with the same name as the command, execute that script, and do whatever they wanted to. But by identifying the full path to the command, it stops that. So George can now use sudo from any workstation to reboot and shut down the system once I make him a member of the sudo group. So this actually gives us a lot of capability to create multiple users, multiple groups, and better to do groups rather than users if you can. But you can create multiple users, multiple groups, but then you can restrict their actions, right? So instead of having to give everybody all power on the system, you can give them the ability to run some things as root, but not everything as root. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and exit without saving changes. So I'm going to hit Control X. It's going to say save the modified buffer, which means you want to save your changes. I'm going to say no, and I'm out of it for the moment because I don't need to make any changes here. Okay, there we go. That is how you can use the sudo group and the vi sudo command to control who's able to run elevated permissions on your system and what they can do with them.